Ruth's hand trembled as she pressed it against the slight swell of her belly. The ultrasound photo slipping from her fingers to the rain-slicked sidewalk in front of the Chicago clinic. Esther caught it mid-fall, their eyes locking for the first time in 6 months. The weight of that forgotten night crashing back like a wave she hadn't braced for. She whispered Ruth's name, barely audible over the honking taxis. And in that moment the city's pulse faded to nothing but the echo of their shared breath. Esther had always chased stories that bled truth from the edges of lives others overlooked. At 32, she was a freelance journalist scraping by on pitches to mid-tier magazines. Her apartment in Wicker Park cluttered with notebooks and half-empty coffee mugs that marked the hours she lost to unraveling secrets. That night 6 months ago had been different though. It started at a dimly lit bar in the Loop. The kind where jazz hummed low and strangers leaned in too close over whiskey neat. Esther had been nursing a deadline hangover, her laptop screen glowing accusations at her from the corner booth. When Ruth slid onto the stool beside her, her laughter cutting through the saxophone's wail like sunlight through fog. "You look like you're interviewing ghosts." Ruth's voice had been soft, laced with that teacher's cadence, the one that coaxed reluctant freshmen into loving poetry. Esther glanced up, caught off guard by the woman's eyes, hazel and steady, framed by lashes that caught the amber light. "I'm just trying to make sense of someone else's mess." She managed a half-smile, pushing her glasses up her nose, a habit from too many late nights squinting at faded documents. Ruth tilted her head, her chestnut waves falling loose over one shoulder. "Messes are the best part. They're where the real stories hide." She was 31 then, a high school literature teacher from Evanston, her days filled with dissecting Austen and Whitman while her evenings blurred into quiet dinners alone. Surrogacy had been her quiet rebellion against the ache of unfulfilled longing, a choice born from too many years watching her friends build families she could only borrow for holidays. But that night she wasn't thinking of contracts or due dates. She was thinking of the way Esther's fingers drummed the bar top. Restless. Alive. They talked until last call, words spilling like rain down the windows. Esther confessed her latest failure, a profile on a whistleblower who vanished before the ink dried. Ruth shared fragments of her own unraveling, the way teaching felt like pouring herself into vessels that leaked. By the time they stumbled out into the autumn chill, the air sharp with fallen leaves, something had shifted. A hesitation at the curb, Ruth's coat brushing Esther's arm. Then, without planning, they were in a cab heading north, the city lights streaking past like promises neither voiced. Esther's apartment was a sanctuary of controlled chaos, books stacked like sentinels against the walls, a single potted fern wilting in protest to her neglect. They shed coats and inhibitions with equal ease, laughter bubbling up as Ruth tripped over a stray cord, pulling Esther down with her onto the worn rug. Their first kiss tasted of bourbon and hesitation, soft at the edges but deepening like a story unfolding. Esther's hands traced the curve of Ruth's neck, feeling the pulse there quicken, a rhythm that matched her own. Ruth's fingers wove into Esther's hair, tugging gently, as if anchoring herself to this unexpected shore. They moved to the bedroom in a tangle of limbs and whispered half-confessions. The sheets were cool against heated skin, the room lit only by the street lamp filtering through thin curtains. Esther paused, her breath catching, to study Ruth's face in the dim glow, the vulnerability there mirroring her own. "I've never. This feels like." Ruth's words trailed off, her hand cupping Esther's cheek. "Like coming home to a place you didn't know you'd left." Esther leaned in, sealing the sentiment with a kiss that lingered, slow and exploratory. Hours blurred into a mosaic of touch and murmur. Ruth's sighs filled the spaces between Esther's questions, soft exhalations that spoke of release long denied. They explored each other with the reverence of scholars deciphering ancient texts. Esther's lips mapping the freckles across Ruth's collarbone, Ruth's nails grazing the small of Esther's back in arcs that arched spines. There was laughter too, when Esther's glasses fogged and slid off, or when Ruth's earring tangled in the sheets, turning gravity into an accomplice. But beneath it all hummed a current of something deeper, a recognition that this was not fleeting but foundational. Dawn crept in gray and unforgiving, painting their entwined forms in reluctant light. Ruth stirred first, her head on Esther's chest, listening to the steady thrum beneath her ear. "We should exchange numbers." Esther's voice was rough with sleep and something sharper. Fear perhaps. Ruth lifted her head, eyes tracing the lines of Esther's face, committing them to memory. I have an early class. And you have your ghosts. She smiled. But it didn't reach her eyes. A flicker of retreat. Esther felt like a chill. They dressed in silence broken only by the zip of jeans and the rustle of fabric. At the door, Ruth turned, her hand lingering on the knob. Last night was. Thank you. Esther nodded, throat tight, watching as Ruth slipped into the hallway, the door clicking shut like a period at the end of an unfinished sentence. She stood there long after, the echo of Ruth's scent clinging to the air, a ghost she couldn't interview. Months passed in a haze of routine and regret. Esther threw herself into work, chasing leads from Seattle coffee shops to Miami motels, her bylines stacking like armor. But the nights were harder, the bed too vast, the silence too accusatory. She told herself it was just one night, a collision of loneliness. But the memory persisted, vivid as fresh print. Ruth, meanwhile, immersed in her surrogate journey, the first trimester a whirlwind of nausea and appointments. The clinic in Chicago became her confessional, the doctor's voices clinical counters to the warmth she craved. She thought of Esther in stolen moments, the journalist's intensity a contrast to the sterile walls, but pushed it down, focusing on the life she carried, not the one she might have wanted. Then came the rain-slicked sidewalk, the dropped photo, the collision that rewrote their fragile peace. Esther had been in the neighborhood for an interview, a piece on urban midwives, irony twisting like a knife as she spotted the clinic. And there was Ruth, emerging pale and purposeful, the image fluttering free. Their eyes met, and time folded. Esther. Ruth's voice cracked on the syllable, hand instinctively protective over her middle. What are you doing here? I could ask the same. Esther held out the photo, her fingers brushing Ruth's as she took it back. A spark that lingered. The rain pattered on, indifferent, as they stood there, umbrellas forgotten, the city's hum a distant roar. Ruth's lips parted, then closed, a sigh escaping like steam. It's not mine. Not in the way you think. She glanced down at the grainy image, a tiny form curled in promise. I'm carrying it for them. A couple from the suburbs. They've waited years. Esther's mind reeled, piecing fragments. The night. The vulnerability. This. Oh God. Ruth. She reached out, then stopped, hand hovering. I'm sorry. That sounds. I don't know what to say. Ruth's laugh was brittle, water beating on her lashes, rain or tears indistinguishable. Say you believe in second drafts. Because last night. It wasn't just bourbon. It was real. They ducked into a nearby diner, the kind with vinyl booths cracked from years of confessions. Over black coffee that steamed like unresolved tension, Ruth unfolded her story. The surrogacy agency had matched her with Mark and Lisa 3 months before that barstool encounter. A decision rooted in empathy for their infertility struggles. Payments covered her student loans. But more than that, it filled a void. A way to create without claiming. Esther listened, her journalist's ear attuned to the pauses, the way Ruth's fingers twisted a napkin into knots. And you? Esther ventured finally, voice low. Did you think of me? After. Every day. Ruth met her gaze, steady now. But I didn't know how to find you. Or if I should. The weight of expectation. The child not hers but woven into her now. Esther nodded, her own confessions bubbling up. I wrote about you. Not by name. A piece on fleeting connections in a disconnected world. It got published last month. Ruth's eyes softened, a smile ghosting her lips. I'd like to read it. If that's okay. The diner clock ticked toward noon, rain easing to a drizzle outside. Esther felt the pull, that same current from months ago, but tempered now by layers of complexity. Walk with me, she said, standing, offering her hand. Ruth took it, their palms warm and sure, stepping into the street where puddles mirrored the shifting sky. They wandered aimlessly, past brownstones dripping ivy, the air thick with the scent of wet pavement and possibility. Conversation flowed in fits, laughter punctuating silences. Esther's stories of botched interviews drawing Ruth's head back in delight. By afternoon they reached the lakefront, Lake Michigan stretching vast and restless under a sky clearing to blue. They sat on a bench, shoulders touching, the photo tucked safe in Ruth's pocket. "Tell me about the baby," Esther asked softly. No judgment in her tone. Ruth leaned into her. A sigh long and releasing. "It's a girl. Kicking already. Like she knows she's got a story to tell. They've named her Hope. Fitting, I suppose." Esther traced a pattern on Ruth's knee. Absent-minded. Her mind turning over the shape of this new reality. "And after? When she's born? What then?" Ruth turned her face up. Sun catching the gold in her hair. "I go back to grading papers and wondering. But maybe not alone. If you're willing to wonder with me." The words hung heavy with invitation. Esther felt her heart stutter. Emotions swirling like the gulls overhead. Fear of the unknown. Joy at the familiar. A ache for what might be. She leaned in. Forehead to Ruth's. Breathing shared. "I'm here. For the wondering. For the rest." As evening fell. They parted with numbers exchanged this time. Promises murmured over a chaste kiss on the cheek. Esther watched Ruth board the train to Evanston. The doors hissing shut. Carrying away the woman who held another life but had claimed a piece of her own. Back in her apartment. The fern seemed less wilted. The notebooks less accusatory. She opened her laptop. Fingers hovering. Then typing. The story wasn't over. It was just beginning its second act. Weeks blurred into a tentative rhythm. Phone calls stretching across the miles between Wicker Park and Evanston like threads weaving a fragile tapestry. Esther found herself lingering over grocery runs. Picking out teas Ruth mentioned craving in offhand texts. The ginger kind for mornings when nausea clawed at her edges. Their first real date since that rain-drenched reunion was at a small Italian place in Andersonville. Tucked away where fairy lights strung across exposed brick cast a glow soft as candle wax. Ruth arrived flushed from the L train. Her sundress loose over the growing curve. Hand resting there as if steadying a secret. Esther stood to greet her. Pulling out the chair with a flourish that drew a genuine laugh. "You clean up nice for pasta," Ruth teased. Settling in. Her eyes tracing Esther's face like rereading a favorite passage. "Only the best for carbonara confessions," Esther replied. Signaling the waiter. Her knee brushing Ruth's under the table. A contact that sent warmth spiraling up her spine. Over plates steaming with al dente strands and pecorino shavings. They peeled back layers. Ruth spoke of her students. The boy in third period who finally grasped the metaphor in Plath's bell jar. His eyes lighting like he'd cracked a code. Esther shared a recent trip to New Orleans. Chasing a story on jazz preservation. The humid nights alive with horns that wailed loss and longing. But beneath the anecdotes simmered the unspoken. The child between them like a character neither fully authored. "I felt her move today," Ruth said midway through tiramisu. Her fork pausing. "Like butterflies. But stronger." Esther reached across. Covering Ruth's hand with her own. Thumb stroking the knuckles. "Does it scare you?" The question slipped out. Raw. Her voice pitched low against the murmur of diners. Ruth's gaze dropped to their joined hands. A breath drawn slow. "Sometimes. Not the birth. That's logistics. Plans in place. But the after." Handing her over. "It's like writing a letter you can't edit once it's sent." Esther squeezed gently. Her own fears mirroring in the quiet. "I wish I could fix that for you. Make it less jagged." Ruth looked up. Hazel eyes shimmering. "You already are. Just being here. Talking it through. That's more than most get." They lingered until closing. The waiter politely stacking chairs. Stepping out into a night crisp with autumn's deepening bite. Arm in arm they walked to Esther's car. The streets hushed. Leaves skittering like whispers. The drive to Evanston was filled with a playlist Ruth curated. Indie folk strumming tales of roads not taken. At Ruth's bungalow. A cozy two-story with porch swing creaking in the breeze. They hesitated on the steps. "Come in for tea," Ruth murmured. Key turning in the lock. Esther followed. The house enveloping her in scents of lavender and old books. Shelves groaning under volumes dog-eared and loved. In the living room. Lamplight pooled golden on the rug. A kettle whistling from the kitchen like an impatient chaperone. They settled on the couch. Mugs steaming between them. Knees touching. Conversation drifted to dreams deferred. Ruth admitting her youthful aspiration to write children's books. Illustrations of girls with wings who chose their own skies. Esther confessed a buried wish to teach. To shape minds rather than merely report their fractures. Laughter wove through. But so did sighs. Ruth's head finding Esther's shoulder. A weight welcome and right. When the tea cooled, Esther set her mug aside, turning to face her. May I? Her hand hovered near Ruth's belly. Permission sought in the arch of brow. Ruth nodded, guiding it down. And there, beneath palm, a flutter insistent as Morse code. Esther's breath hitched. Eyes widening. She's saying hello. Ruth chuckled softly. But her voice thickened. Or goodbye in advance. No. Esther whispered, leaning to press lips to Ruth's temple. She's saying we're all connected. Somehow. The kiss that followed was inevitable. Slow building from comfort to kindling. Ruth's hands framed Esther's face, pulling her closer. The taste of chamomile lingering sweet. They moved with care, mindful of the life nestled within. Shedding clothes in measured increments. The air humming with anticipation tempered by tenderness. On the bed, sheets crisp with fresh linen. They rediscovered rhythms from that first night. But evolved. Attuned to new contours. Esther's touches were reverent. Tracing the taut skin of Ruth's abdomen. Kisses planted like seeds of affirmation. Ruth arched into her. Sighs escaping in waves. Fingers threading through auburn strands. Grounding. There was no rush. Only immersion. Bodies speaking what words faltered. Afterward. Tangled and sated. Ruth traced patterns on Esther's arm. Voice drowsy. Stay. Just tonight. Esther did. Waking to birdsong filtering through lace curtains. Ruth's form curled against her. Belly a gentle rise between. They breakfasted on toast and jam. Sunlight slanting across the table. Conversation light as the steam from their coffee. But as Esther prepared to leave for a midday meeting, the air thickened with the reality awaiting. Agency check-in this afternoon. Ruth said. Rinsing plates. Her back to the sink. Routine stuff. Measurements. Heartbeats. Want company. Esther offered. Drawing a mug with deliberate slowness. Ruth turned. Water droplets catching light on her lashes. You'd do that. For the boring parts. Esther stepped close. Towel forgotten. For all parts. The boring. The beautiful. The in-between. They kissed then. Lingering. A seal on the burgeoning bond. The surrogacy appointment was in a sleek office downtown. Glass walls reflecting the loop's relentless energy. Esther waited in the lobby. Thumbing through a magazine on prenatal yoga. Her mind sketching headlines she wouldn't write, love in the waiting room. When Ruth emerged. Report in hand. Her smile was weary but warm. All good. She's growing like she's got places to be. They lunched at a falafel spot nearby. Pita pockets stuffed with hummus and cucumber. Laughter bubbling over spilled tahini. But as they parted for the afternoon, Esther's phone buzzed with an email. A job offer in Los Angeles. 3 months embedded with a non-profit on housing rights. Tempting. Steady pay after years of freelance flux. She pocketed it. Unmentioned. The seed of conflict burrowing. That evening, alone in her apartment, Esther paced. The fern mocking her from its spot. Ruth's texts lit her screen. A photo of her reading Bronte to an empty nursery corner. Caption, borrowing voices till mine catches up. Esther replied with a selfie from her desk. Glasses askew, chasing mine down. But sleep evaded. The offer a siren call clashing with the pull toward Evanston. Toward Ruth. The next weekend brought them to Milwaukee. A spontaneous road trip pitched over late-night call. Esther drove. Windows down. Wind whipping hair as they crossed the border. Lake Michigan a constant companion on the left. They checked into a lakeside inn. Rooms with views of waves lapping gray pebble shores. Dinner was at a brewery. Craft beers for Esther. Sparkling water with lime for Ruth. Stories exchanged over pretzels warm and salted. Night fell soft. And in their room, with the lake murmuring outside, they surrendered again. Bodies attuned in the queen bed's embrace. Ruth's sighs were deeper now. Laced with the fullness of her form. Esther's responses fervent. A counterpoint of devotion. They whispered futures in the afterglow. Hazy sketches of co-authored lives. But dawn brought clarity's edge. Sunday morning. Over coffee on the balcony. Esther broached the offer. Words tumbling cautious. It's in L.A. Starts in January. Good money. Real impact. Ruth's cup paused midway. Expression shuddering briefly. And us? Where do we fit in 3,000 miles? Esther reached for her hand. We make it work. Visits. Calls. The whole long-distance dance. I've done it before. But this is different. Ruth's voice held a tremor. Eyes on the horizon. There's her to consider. The handoff in April. My recovery. I can't. We can't. Be half present for that. Silence stretched. Broken only by gulls crying overhead. Esther felt the ground tilt. Emotions churning. Fear of loss. Anger at timing's cruelty. Love stubborn as tide. I'm not leaving you. Not really. Just chasing a chance. Ruth nodded. But the light in her eyes dimmed. Chances are what got us here. Remember. They drove back in companionable quiet. Radio filling voids. The miles marking fractures. At Ruth's door. The kiss was fierce. Desperate. A plea unspoken. Call me when you decide. Ruth said. Stepping inside. Door soft in closing. Esther returned to Chicago Hollow. The city's pulse mocking her unrest. Days turned to deliberations. Pros lists scrawled in margins. Cons bleeding ink. She visited the lakefront alone. Bench empty without Ruth's warmth. The water's vastness a mirror to doubt. One night. Phone in hand. She dialed. Voice steady. I'm staying. The story here. It's ours. Relief flooded Ruth's end. Laughter wet with tears. Come over. Now. Esther did. Arriving to arms open. Bodies reuniting in urgent affirmation. But the choice lingered. A shadow on the joy. Hinting at costs yet to tally. As winter crept in. Snow dusting Evanston's eaves. Their bond deepened in domestic increments. Esther stocked Ruth's fridge with soup simmered slow. Attended prenatal classes where they practiced breathing in sync. Hands linked. Ruth read aloud from her lesson plans. Esther critiquing with mock seriousness. Evenings ending in tangled sheets. Sighs mingling with the wind's howl. Yet undercurrents stirred. Mark and Lisa, the intended parents, hosted a cautious dinner in their Oak Park home. A Victorian with nursery half-painted in pastels. Esther met them. Handshakes firm. Conversations polite over roast chicken and greens. Lisa's eyes, bright with gratitude, fixed on Ruth's belly. She's ours because of you. Thank you doesn't cover it. Mark nodded. Arm around his wife. We're family now. All of us. Esther smiled through it. But inside churned unease. The word family elastic. Stretching to include or exclude. Driving home. Ruth sensed it. They adore you. Esther glanced over. Wipers slashing snowflakes. And you? But where do I stand? In their nursery tale. Ruth's hand found her thigh. Right here. With me. Always. The reassurance soothed. But not fully. As January loomed with its white blank threats. Esther turned down the LA gig. Pitching instead a local series on surrogate stories. Her editor intrigued. Ruth beamed at the news. Pulling her close in the kitchen. Flour dusted from holiday cookies. You chose us. Over the coast. Esther buried face in her neck. Inhaling vanilla and truth. Every time. But choices cast ripples. Friends questioned. Her network whispering of missed opportunities. The freelance grind unrelenting. Esther pushed through. Articles landing. But exhaustion shadowed her eyes. One February evening. After a brutal deadline. She arrived at Ruth's irritable. Snapping over misplaced keys. Words escalated. Old insecurities surfacing. You think this is easy for me? Ruth shot back. Voice rising. Carrying their dream. Loving you. Balancing it all. Esther recoiled. Regret instant. I'm sorry. It's just. The world's pulling. And I'm trying to hold ground. They collapsed onto the couch. Tears salting skin. Apologies murmured into hair. Ruth's hand guided Esther's to her belly. Kicks fluttering like forgiveness. Feel that. She's reminding us. We're enough. Spring teased with thaws. Parks blooming defiant against lingering cold. They weekend in Door County. Cherry blossoms framing hikes where hands swung linked. Conversations meandering to post-birth visions. Ruth imagined travel. Light loads. Reclaiming her body. Esther dreamed collaborations. Co-writing a memoir of their unlikely weave. Laughter echoed on trails. But gravity pulled in quiet moments. The due date circling like a hawk. One April afternoon. Contractions whispered onset. Ruth timing them in the classroom. Dismissing students with feigned calm. She called Esther from the parking lot. Voice pitched urgent. It's time. Meet me at the hospital. Esther raced from a cafe interview. Heart hammering. Arriving to find Ruth in triage. Gown-clad and brave. Hours stretched in labor's grip. Esther at her side. Cool cloths and encouragements her arsenal. Ruth's grips bruised fingers. Sighs turning to groans. The room a cocoon of beeps and breaths. Push. Love. Esther coached. Kissing sweat-damp brow. You've got this. We do. At dawn. Hope arrived. Cry piercing the hush. Tiny fists flailing. Mark and Lisa entered tear-streaked. Taking their daughter with awe. Thanks profuse. Ruth watched. Emptied yet full. Body aching with loss and release. Esther held her through the sobs. Silent sentinel. The bond between them forged fiercer in the forge. Recovery draped over Ruth like a heavy quilt. The hospital discharge papers crisp in her hand as they wheeled her out into May's tentative sun. Esther drove slow through Evanston's tree-lined streets. Windows cracked to leaden birdsong. Her free hand resting light on Ruth's knee. The bungalow waited. Stocked with frozen lasagnas from well-wishers and a stack of novels Ruth had earmarked for this limbo. But the quiet hit hardest once inside. The nursery corner bare now. Echoes of painted walls mocking the vacancy. Ruth moved gingerly. Stitches pulling with each step. Her body a map of recent wars. Esther fussed. Fluffing pillows on the couch. Brewing herbal teas that steamed forgiveness. Sit. I'll handle dinner. But Ruth waved her off. A ghost of smile playing. I need to move. Feel like me again. They compromised on takeout sushi. Unrolling photomaki on the coffee table. Conversation circling the unspoken. How are you? Really? Esther asked finally. Chopsticks hovering. Ruth chewed slow. Gaze on the window where rain threatened. Hollow. Like I left a piece there. In that room. But also. Free. In a way I didn't expect. Esther nodded. Setting her roll down. Reaching across the clutter. You gave everything. And kept more. I'm proud. The words landed soft. But Ruth's eyes welled. A sigh escaping long and ragged. Nights were the thief. Sleep elusive as Ruth's body rebelled. Hormones crashing like waves on jagged rock. Esther stayed over. Bed a refuge where she held Ruth through shivers. Whispers soothing the dark. Tell me a story. Ruth murmured once. Voice small. Esther obliged. Spinning a tale of two wanderers in a city of endless lights. Their paths crossing not by chance but by some cosmic thread. Ruth listened. Head on Esther's chest. The rhythm lulling her toward dawn. Weeks turned. Appointments charting healing. The agency checks deposited with mechanical efficiency. Ruth returned to school part-time. Her classroom a bomb. Students' chaos a distraction from inner tides. Esther's series launched. Interviews with surrogates painting portraits of resilience. Her byline bold under headlines that hinted at heart. They celebrated with a picnic in Washington Park. Blankets spread under oaks. Cheese and grapes devoured as laughter bridged gaps. But fractures lingered. One evening, over wine at a Lincoln Park bistro, Ruth confessed a dream half-formed. What if I did it again? Surrogacy. Not soon. But someday. The funds could mean security. Travel. Esther's glass paused. Emotions flickering. Fear first. Visceral. Then understanding. Laced with ache. If it's what you need. ID support. But we'd talk it through. Every step. Ruth's relief was palpable. Hands squeezing. That's why you're you. Seeing the whole page. Summer bloomed fierce. Heat waves shimmering off asphalt as they escaped to the boundary waters. Minnesota's lakes a mirror to untamed hearts. Canoe rented. They paddled lazy circles. Water lapping hull like applause. Evenings by campfire. Marshmallows charred to perfection. Stories unfurled under star-pricked sky. Esther spoke of her childhood in rural Ohio. Summers chasing fireflies. The quiet that bred her curiosity. Ruth shared Boston roots. Irish Catholic echoes in her laugh. The literature that saved her from silence. One night. Lake still as glass. They swam naked. Moonlight silvering skin. Ruth surfaced gasping. Water streaming. Pulling Esther close in the shallows. I love you. The words slipped free. Unadorned. Hanging in the humid air. Esther stilled. Heart thundering louder than loon calls. I love you too. Back. Fierce and final. They kissed there. Water buoying. Bodies aligning in affirmation. The declaration a cornerstone laid. Back in Chicago. The words rooted. Infusing days with intention. Esther cleared space in her Wicker Park closet for Ruth's sundresses. Weekends merging into shared routines. Coffee brewed tandem. Mornings lazy with newspapers and limbs entwined. But autumn brought gusts of change. Esther's editor pitched a book deal. Expansion of the Surrogate series. Requiring travel to coasts for deeper dives. Ruth, now fully returned to teaching, juggled syllabi in the quiet pull of her own writing. Notebooks filling with prose tentative as first drafts. They navigated with calls from hotel rooms. Esther in San Francisco fog recounting interviews with women whose stories echoed Ruth's. Miss you. The ache in her voice crossed wires. Ruth, curled on her porch swing, replied soft. Come home to this. The swings creak a metronome to her longing. Reunions were fervent. Airport hugs crushing. Nights reclaiming lost hours in urgent touch. Sighs punctuation to reunion script. Yet distance bred doubts. Small as seeds. One November call. Esther weary from red ice. Snapped over a missed dinner. You said you'd be here. Ruth's tone sharpened. And you said 3 weeks? Not 5. The line crackled with unsaid hurts. Apologies trailing into silence. They mended over Thanksgiving at Ruth's. Turkey roasted golden. Kin of choice gathered. But the undercurrent hummed. A reminder of fragility. Winter solstice neared. Holidays a gauntlet of family pulls. Esther flew to Ohio. Enduring Aunt's queries on settling down. Her smiles tight around truths half shared. Ruth hosted her Boston clan. Tales of Esther woven casual into toasts. Acceptance tentative but growing. New Year's they rang in New York. Confetti swirling in Times Square. Hands linked against the crush. Midnight kiss a vow renewed. Spring 2026 dawned with Ruth's manuscript query. A children's book submitted on a whim. Rejection swift but kindling lit. Esther cheered. Mock toasting with sparkling cider. Her book proposal gaining traction. Agent buzzing. They weekend in the Smokies. Tennessee trails winding through mist. Hands clasped on a sense. Pauses for breaths and kisses. Atop a ridge. Vista sprawling. Ruth leaned into Esther. We're climbing. Together. But summits cast long shadows. July brought news, Lisa's call. Hope's first steps captured in video. Chubby legs wobbling toward outstretched arms. Ruth watched. Tears silent. Joy tangled with grief. Esther held her after. Body spooned close. She's beautiful. Like her first mom. Ruth turned in the embrace. Eyes searching. And us? Are we beautiful too? Esther kissed her slow. The most. August heat pressed. And with it? A curveball. Ruth's doctor flagged irregular cycles. Post-surrogacy echoes demanding tests. Waiting rooms revisited. Scans stark white. Results a murmur of monitoring needed. Esther canceled a Portland trip. Prioritizing scans over sources. Her presence a shield. Ruth's fear mirrored in hazel depths. What if? Esther silenced with touch. Whatever. Well face. Tests trended benign. Watchful waiting the prescription. Relief a exhale collective. They marked it with a getaway to Napa. Vineyards rolling gold under relentless sun. Wine tastings led to lazy afternoons in hammocks. Bodies swaying synced. Conversations deep as Merlot. Ruth voiced a vision, a home together. Perhaps outside the city. Space for writing desks side by side. Esther's heart swelled. Yes. To all. Fall leaves turned. And with them? Commitments crystallized. Esther's book sold. Advance a cushion against freelance famines. Ruth's second submission landed an agent. Doors cracking open. They house hunted in Oak Park. Victorians whispering welcome. Offers tendered on a craftsman with porch for swings. Closing day. Keys in hand. They danced in empty rooms. Laughter echoing off bare walls. Furniture trucks trailing. Moving day chaos bonded. Boxes labeled in dual scripts. Pizza devoured on floors amid bubble wrap. First night in the new home. Bed unmade in the master. They made love slow. Walls thin with promise. Sighs rising to rafters. Dawn found them tangled. Coffee brewing downstairs. The world outside waiting patient. But joy's underbelly stirred. Holiday cards from Mark and Lisa arrived. Hope's grin gap-toothed. Thanks inscribed anew. Ruth traced the photo. Sigh heavy. Part of me misses her. The Daily. Esther nodded. Arm around shoulders. That's love. It doesn't divide. They hosted a housewarming. Friends toasting futures. But in quiet after. Doubts surfaced. Am I enough? Ruth whispered into Esther's neck. Without that peace. You're everything. Esther affirmed. Fingers tracing spine. The piece that fits me. Winter wrapped them cozy. Fires crackling. Manuscripts poured over in tandem. Esther's drafts read aloud. Ruth's illustrations sketched tentative. Collaboration a spark. Spring 2027 bloomed with Ruth's book deal. Whimsical tales of winged girls finding nests. Launch party in a loop bookstore. Shelves groaning under her name. Esther's pride luminous. Reciprocation came summer. Esther's reading in a packed hall. Ruth front row beaming. Applause faded to after-party toasts. Hands linked under tables. Eyes promising eternities. Yet life's script twisted. Fall brought a call, agency inquiring. Another match potential. High compensation for Ruth's proven grace. She waited silent. Nights restless. Esther sensed. Broached gentle. If it's calling. But Ruth shook head. Not now. Maybe never. You're my creation. The one I keep. Relief mingled with understanding. Their bond a deliberate choice. They traveled light. Weekends in Savannah's squares. Moss-draped oaks framing walks. Suppers of shrimp and grits shared slow. Conversations deepened. Vulnerabilities aired like laundry in sun. One December eve. Snow blanketing lawns. Esther knelt by the Christmas tree. Ring simple golden palm. Marry me. Not for papers or parties. For the story we write daily. Ruth's yes was tear-choked. Embrace fierce. The tree lights haloing their joy. Wedding planning wove spring. Small affair in the Smokies. Vows exchanged under dogwoods. Friends witnessing. Rings slipped on. Kisses sealed. The I do a period turned comma. Honeymoon in Maine. Coastal paths trod hand in hand. Lobster feasts and lighthouse climbs. Nights and inns with sea views. Bodies celebrating union. Back home. Life settled into married cadence. Routines enriched. Esther's book toured coasts. Ruth accompanying when classes allowed. Hotel nights a reprise of early days. Her second book illustrated. Launches joint affairs. Fans inquiring on muses shared. Years layered. 2028 bringing a foster inquiry. Tentative steps toward family on their terms. Classes attended. Home studies passed. The wait a quiet vigil. When little Maya arrived. 5 and fierce. Papers signed. Their home expanded. Chaos welcomed. Mornings now threefold. Pancakes flipped tandem. Ruth reading bedtime tales. Esther braiding hair with clumsy fingers. Doubts surfaced in whispers. Parenting's pull testing seams. But they mended. Therapy sessions fortifying. Love the glue. By 2030. Maya's laughter filled rooms. Her questions endless. Futures sketched in crayon. Ruth's third book dedicated to them. Winged girls now with families chosen. Esther's sequel chronicled their weave. Anonymity preserved but truths bared. One anniversary. Lakeside again. Canoe bobbing gentle. Esther turned to Ruth. That night in Chicago. It started everything. Ruth smiled. Hand on hers. And the child I carried. She taught us capacity. They kissed. Water lapping witness. The story theirs. Enduring. Decades folded like pages in a well-loved volume. The bungalow traded for a craftsman in Madison, Wisconsin, where academia beckoned Ruth to a university post. Her lectures on narrative empathy drawing crowds. Esther freelanced from a home office overlooking gardens they tended together. Tomatoes ripening red under her inexpert care. Her columns now syndicated. Voices from margins amplified. Maya grew tall and thoughtful. Off to college by 2045. Her art major a blend of mother's influences. Visits home laced with debates over dinner and hugs fierce as anchors. Their love? Seasoned. Showed in quiet rituals, Sunday drives through Door County orchards. Saidar Sempertart. Hands linked over gearshift. Anniversaries marked with letters read aloud. Confessions evolved from passion to partnership profound. Esther's arthritis crept in slow. Fingers stiffening over keyboards. But Ruth's massages eased. Stories dictated in evenings by firelight. Her voice the vessel. Ruth's body. Once a vessel for others. Turned inward. Menopause a chapter of hot flashes and reflections. Journals filled with gratitudes for the forms it took. They traveled light. Europe in autumns. Paris cafes where Ruth sketched passers-by. Esther interviewed locals on love's quiet revolutions. Laughter persisted. Over mispronounced menus or lost in Roman alleys. Bodies still seeking in hotel sheets. Touches slower but no less electric. Sighs drawn long with appreciation. Challenges came uninvited. 2048's diagnosis for Esther. Early dementia's fog. Names slipping like sand. Ruth adapted. Labels on drawers. Routines mapped. Her literature lens framing it as a story unfinished. Support groups joined. Maya's hand held through tears. The family a triad resilient. Esther fought with words. Her final book a memoir co-authored. Ruth transcribing. Their voices intertwined, from one night to a lifetime. The plot we plotted together. As fog thickened. Memories anchored on Ruth's face. The clearest constant. That night. In the bar. Esther would murmur. Eyes searching. Ruth would lean close. Hazel steady. Bourbon and jazz. You in glasses? Me pretending confidence. They laughed. Frail now but true. The echo a lifeline. May 2055. Cherry blossoms framing the porch. Esther slipped away gentle. Ruth at bedside. Maya's hand in hers. The room held sun and stories. Last breath a sigh released. Ruth grieved vast. Walks by the lake where they canoed. Whispers to wind carrying confessions. Memorial simple. Readings from their books. Friends toasting the woman who chased truths and held them close. Year solo. Ruth taught on. Her classes enriched by loss. Narratives of endurance. Manuscripts continued. Dedications to Esther etched in forewords, to the one who remembered our night. And made it eternal. Maya married. Grandchildren arrived. Tiny hands in hers echoing surrogacies past. But claimed fully now. At 85. Ruth sat on that porch swing. Creak familiar. Journal open to a blank page. The sun dipped low. Painting sky in hues of their first dawn. She wrote slow. Pen deliberate, she carried another's child. Yet in our shared night. We carried each other. Always. Closing the cover. She sighed content. The afterglow humanistic. A life layered in love's quiet depth. The story complete yet echoing soft into twilight.